Hello, welcome to this webinar on social enterprises and the future of public services. My name is Shahan Pereira and I'm the content manager here at Social Enterprise UK. So social enterprises can be found running public services across the country, from public transport and nurseries to social care. They're also a vital part of the NHS family, delivering around £1.5 billion worth of health and care services. In fact, a third of all community health services are delivered by social enterprises. But given social enterprises' unique business model, not being state-owned and also not being large shareholder-owned private businesses, they're often misunderstood by politicians and policymakers. This being in spite of the many ways social enterprises are showing real innovation and leadership when it comes to a whole range of things that the public sector can learn from building services around the needs of communities to employee ownership. So to discuss some of the big issues around social enterprises and public services, particularly with regards to the future of the NHS, we're delighted to be joined by Scott Darrow, who's the Chief Executive at Social Adventures, which is a totally inspiring social enterprise based up in Salford. Thanks so much for joining us, Scott. Oh, and you were on mute. Classic error.
Classic error, schoolboy error of 2021. So thanks for the introduction. I'm Scott Darrow from Social Adventures in Greater Manchester. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you all.
Fab. Just before we start with the interview itself, just a bit on the format. So we're probably looking at around a 45-minute chat with Scott, which will give us plenty of time, around 15 minutes worth of time for questions at the end. And you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. If things are not working, just drop a message in the chat and I'm sure we can figure out what may be going wrong. So cool, where to start really, given the amount of stuff that Social Adventures does. I suppose it would be good if you could just tell us, Scott, a little bit more about, what Social Adventures is, what you do, the services you operate, and also a bit around the general ethos around your business model and how you work.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so we were a spin-out organisation, so we spun out of the NHS in 2011. So this is our 10th year this year. Of operation, and we delivered while we were in the NHS some services that were around mental health, learning disabilities and public health. And back in 2011, we got the opportunity to spin those services out and create a social enterprise. We decided to become a community benefit society. We wanted to be co-owned between service users, people that use the services, and also the staff. So we wanted to create that kind of dynamic where we could really kind of change the culture of the organization and drive the culture from that kind of co-production kind of focus. So we started out with a handful of kind of local authority and NHS contracts, and then over the last 10 years we've really diversified. So we went out and bought a garden centre to host a mental health service. We set up we actually went out and acquired a number of children's day nurseries and brought them into the portfolio. More recently, we set up a supermarket. We were discussing that just before we came on air, weren't we, about kind of, who sets up a retail business in the global pandemic? Probably a social enterprise, probably somebody, looking at what the needs of the community are and trying to kind of focus in on them. We've kind of we've diversified the kind of geographical kind of footprint that we work in. We work across several areas in Greater Manchester now, not just in the area that we started out in. And we've kind of tried to kind of develop a quite sustainable business model where we've got kind of a combination of kind of commissioned income and also income that we generate from sales, really, from trading. And that money then gets reinvested back into kind of the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. We've had a really exciting kind of 10 years since we spun out of the public sector, and more recently, being kind of front and center of the COVID response having to really kind of adapt and kind of change what we do to the needs of the community during the pandemic.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I think I suppose just, from what you just said, I guess what's really striking about Social Adventures and the work you do is how you kind of look at things holistically and how you're kind of joining the dots between the different things that are sort of preventing people from living healthy lives. So I guess we're looking at doing a bit of work around health inequalities at SCUK and understanding kind of, what role social enterprises have in addressing kind of the root causes of kind of poor health. To what extent do you reckon your work is kind of motivated by this kind of understanding of the need to address kind of the root causes of kind of health inequalities? Because you're tackling stuff around access to food through the supermarket, childcare, connecting with other people.
Yeah, so I mean, we recognised, when we were working in the public sector, often the inequalities, we started often from a kind of a position of what people needed rather than what assets we had in communities and what assets we had as an organisation. I think we've really built that kind of asset-based approach into kind of the work that we're doing. So we've used the resources that we've got, for instance, having a garden centre where we could treat people as volunteers rather than mental health service users really changed that dynamic. And through the work that they were doing with kind of horticulture and being outside all day and kind of linking with the natural environment, we saw that was reducing, improving their health outcomes. So I think it's linking up some of the business opportunities that you've got as a social enterprise with some of the health inequalities that you've got within communities. And often you can do that. There's often, a sustainable model of actually addressing both the kind of challenges that communities are facing, but also do that in a really sustainable way by trading at the same time. So we've been able to kind of link those things up. I mean, in Greater Manchester, Greater Manchester has been one of the hardest hit kind of areas with COVID. It's had the longest lockdowns of across the country, and it's really kind of highlighted and spotlighted that kind of health inequalities that are still there within communities. We were talking about this before Kate came out. Where our head offices are based in Salford, there is there's a real kind of sense of regeneration. Lots of new people coming into the area, but that's really changed the demographics locally. We've got much more diverse, a lot more BME communities moving into the area than we had maybe 20 years ago. So it's meant that we've had to really kind of tailor the responses that we've got to the community. And I think being kind of co-owned with local people has really helped us kind of listen in a different way to those needs during the pandemic. And we've been able to kind of, challenge some of the ways that we maybe did things in the past. And certainly, as we come out of lockdown on Monday, fingers crossed, touch wood. I think there's going to be a lot of lessons that we've learned during the pandemic that we'd like to carry forward and continue to do as we need to address those kind of health inequalities in the communities that we're working in.
I guess you've touched on this already when you're talking about kind of co-ownership, kind of with local communities and with staff as well. I suppose one of the big things when I'm thinking about social enterprises and public services, because I know when I started at SE UK quite a long time ago as an intern, it was something I really didn't know much about, and I actually found it really surprising that social enterprises were delivering social care or health services and at quite a large scale. And I guess what does being a social enterprise allow you to do that can't be done kind of within the traditional kind of public sector framework, which I think is still the way a lot of people view public services, right? They see like the NHS as like this big bureaucratic body, stuff like that.
I mean, people might not know who are on the webinar the kind of scale of it, but there's at least 1.5 billion pounds of the public services now delivered by social enterprises that started within the NHS or local authority. Or within government even, and they've spun out over the last 10 years and really kind of changed the way that they deliver services. I think, speaking to colleagues that work across the sector, I think one of the main motivations was the ability to innovate. So there was a frustration with the speed of innovation within the public sector, and there was a real kind of appetite amongst some of the leaders within the public sector to kind of innovate in a new and different way. I think the second thing is around kind of the ability to generate a surplus and reinvest that back into your core purpose. In the public sector, the ability to kind of generate additional income is limited, but also the ability to reinvest any surplus in your budget back into what you were doing was limited as well, because it was a year-on-year budget. So it always felt like you were kind of almost treading water within the public sector, whereas being a social enterprise, you can really see the growth and development of the services and the organisation and the staff team as well as a result of that. And I think, the ability to have that sense of co-ownership and employee ownership and have employee engagement in a different way was a real kind of driver for organisations. They really saw the value, in people-powered public services. And when you put people at the core of delivery and you make them feel like they're empowered to make decisions and kind of drive what they're doing forward without that kind of sense of bureaucracy, productivity is improved. we were talking about this during our kind of board meeting a few weeks ago. Even our staff sickness during the pandemic has been, I think it's about 10% lower than it has been in other areas of the public sector. Which has been, I think a good indication of that's not COVID related sickness. I mean, sickness in general. And I think that was one of the things that we saw. Another kind of indication is the spend. We saw our spend go down by 6% by empowering staff to make decisions about what they were spending money on. Right. So I think this, innovation is a key driver. I think that kind of sense of empowerment for staff was a real kind of key driver. And I think the fact that we wanted to kind of create a sustainable model of delivering public services, it was right at the kind of start of the austerity kind of conversation, and a lot of organisations were really looking down the barrel of quite severe kind of austerity. And in my case, I doubt the services that we were delivering would have survived if we hadn't done something different.
Cool. So I guess going back sort of 10 years. Happy birthday, by the way. I don't think I said that at the start, but yeah, could you sort of take us back to kind of 2011, like you said, the onset of austerity, and tell us a bit about the process of how social adventures kind of shifted out of the NHS, and what was the political climate like at the time? Was there a lot of support for what you were doing from government? But I guess also, was there support amongst the people you were providing services to and staff that you would have been working with at that time?
Really good question. Yeah, I think the political landscape was a real, it was really red hot at the time. It had cross-party support, I think, from all the major parties. In my constituency in Salford, Hazel Blaze was the MP, really driving the idea of social enterprise and social enterprises within public service was a real kind of thing for her. You also had, the coalition government come in, and they were very, very supportive. You had the likes of Francis Maud, who were a real advocate of kind of mutualisation within public services. So I think there was a real, strong political landscape. You had a backdrop of real kind of change within the public sector, almost very similar to what's going on at the moment with the advent of the integrated care organisations and the reshuffle that's happening currently within the NHS. So there was a real strong political kind of backdrop to it, and real strong political support. You had the social enterprise unit was set up within the Department of Health, and then that later became hosted within the Cabinet Office, which was really good to kind of have that kind of unit set up there. And more locally, I think locally in Salford, they've always been very innovative around the way that they deliver services. So there was a good local political appetite as well, with the small p, from the sector and the system wanting to do things differently. I think the staff, were concerned, about what this meant. They'd probably never heard of what a social enterprise was 10 years ago. And, it was quite a traumatic experience for them to kind of think about not being part of the NHS, which a lot of them had signed up to be part of when they joined the NHS. So that was there was quite a bit of transition for staff and for service users to some extent as well, about the way that we were, moving as an organisation. I think the staff that have been here from the beginning, if you ask them now today, I think they'd honestly say that they wouldn't, go back. They'd like the freedom and the autonomy that they get, with being not part of the NHS anymore. But I think we've still got that sense that we're part of the wider NHS family. We still feel like, it's been really good as part of the COVID response to be part of that system response in the area, and being considered as a peer with, other public sector bodies. I think that's been a real success really with COVID. So yeah, it's been, the initial 12 months was a real eye opener, coming out of the public sector and having to set up systems and processes, get a real kind of strong sense of, running a business rather than running a service. That was a real transition for myself and the staff team.
And was there much sort of support around that, or was it literally kind of, oh my God, we're running a social enterprise now? Like,
there was, we got a little bit of money from the Department of Health to help us to kind of set up, and some due diligence stuff to help us to get the legal stuff up and running. And there were some actual there was a really good development program run by the School of Social Entrepreneurs at the beginning. So there was a little bit of support. The main support actually was from others in the sector doing the same thing. We often met up and including myself, people were in tears, over what was going on and how to kind of navigate it, and we had to write a business plan, and there was lots of that. But there was a really good sense of camaraderie amongst the leaders that were doing it within the sector, and that was really, really good to see. And I think that stayed during the 10 years and helped us to work very closely in partnership with each other. And there's some great examples of that across the country where organisations have come together to collaborate on things, and I think that's given the sector a real strength and giving it real kind of it's given it a real kudos within the system that it's been able to do that.
And I guess what was like your prime motivation in spinning out?
I always kind of, I always felt a little bit like I didn't fit in the system. I often used to get phone calls from the finance director or the HR director, usually shouting at me, telling me that I couldn't do things. So I'd already done them by the point that they were telling me I couldn't do them. So I nice. Felt like I probably didn't fit within the system and I needed a different way of doing stuff. And I always felt like, as soon as I kind of found out about what a social enterprise was and kind of went to visit a few and understood the kind of the culture and the ethos behind it, I really felt that there was an opportunity to do things differently within the public sector. And at the time, there was concerns from the unions that this was privatization by the back door and that would all be snaffled up by Serco and people like that. Within the first few years, there was concern that we weren't sustainable. That there would be a handful left after 10 years. There's I think the ones that have failed I can count probably on two hands, maybe even one hand. So it's been a very low attrition rate in terms of failure. So looking back on that, I think 10 years on, it's been a quite a big success. It's definitely something that we should be shouting about as a sector and feeding that learning back into government and maybe rekindling some of the fire that was there maybe 10 years ago.
So I guess look back to politics. I suppose social enterprises, because they're not these big private sector organizations, they're not the Sercos of the world, and equally they're not kind of your standard traditional in-house NHS provider. Would you say they sometimes fall through the gaps when it comes to political decision making?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've definitely seen a decline in interest in the sector over the last 10 years. I think in the last 18 months with the pandemic, it's been very difficult to get a voice within government, within Whitehall. I think you've had the combination of Brexit and the pandemic, which has really changed the focus of government it's lurched in a very different direction. I think they've wound up a lot of the departments that were looking after these things. It got kind of moved eventually into the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which it didn't really fit into.
Yeah, so health services in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport is a very, very random bit, isn't it?
It is a very random bit, and I think that and finding the political kind of appetite at the moment is quite difficult. So I think as we come out of the pandemic, I think that's a challenge to the sector to really think about that. To think about do we need to invest into campaigning collectively more? Do we need to invest into getting collective messages? Often we can be seen quite fragmented, I think, within government. I think they can look at us as being a collection of lots of very loud voices that are all speaking a slightly different language. And I think maybe we need to think about that as we kind of move forward out of the pandemic.
So as some people on the call may know, the NHS is currently going through a massive reorganisation with the Health and Care Bill. Is that right? That's the right name, isn't it?
Yeah, Health and Care Bill. Yeah.
Health and Care Bill. It'll be interesting, I suppose, to get your thoughts on that, but also if you could give listeners maybe a brief overview on what the proposed changes are, and maybe kind of again looking through this framing of like, are social enterprises being ignored by policymakers? Because my understanding of the bill, which is quite limited to be honest, is that it's kind of pushing towards more collaboration over kind of competition when it comes to tendering, which on the surface sounds really good because social enterprises are natural collaborators, as many people know. But what are your thoughts on, what the impact of the bill may be like, but also, what's the bill all about and why is it happening? Why is it happening now?
That's some real good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I've been part of some meetings recently where I'm not sure the system knows what
Yes.
the answers are to those questions. But I mean, at the kind of core of it is a collection of two things. One is about being more integrated between health and social care and bringing the provider aspect of that closer together. After spending maybe 10 years ago, we were doing kind of a lot of kind of pulling apart commissioning and providers, into kind of separate things. Now they're doing a lot of pushing those providers back together in a different way, using the geographical footprint and having more kind of more system control over a larger geographical area. So, when I joined the NHS, it was all about pulling apart the health authorities. It feels very much like they're reconvening some of the structures that were within health authorities previously. And I think the second part of it is around that kind of procurement part of it. So procurement legislation, there's a green paper out on procurement at the moment, but it's around kind of changing the need to use OGU and the OGU procurement exercises to actually award contracts. So potentially there's some real benefits there to the sector, because if the system recognises that we're an integral kind of cog within the machine, then it could end up. One of the things that we're lobbying for locally is longer contracts, so 15-year, 20-year contracts rather than 3-year contracts. So that's something that we're advocating for, because unless there's contract failure, unless things are not working, or unless the cost of running the service goes through the roof, there shouldn't really be a need to tender a service out. So that might mean less competition, but through less competition, we might find that there's more collaboration, because one of the problems with the sector at the moment is we're all working in arbitrary markets where we're all forced to compete with each other. And you've only got to look at, I saw Be Caring this week on Northwest Tonight, which is a social enterprise that delivers care services. And they were talking about the real living wage. And one of the reasons why they can't pay the real living wage is they're constantly forced to compete in these arbitrary markets.
It sounds like a race to the bottom, even though social enterprises, they all want to be paying their staff a living wage, don't they? Like,
precisely. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to combat some of those arbitrary markets that we've been forced to work in previously. And I think that's created some real kind of it's created some real perverse kind of results in the sector, where organizations are naturally predisposed to collaborate, but because we're forced to compete more than we're forced to collaborate, we don't do, and that means that innovation isn't shared freely across the sector, and it means that we haven't got hotbeds of kind of innovation in the ways that we probably would need to kind of meet these kind of health inequalities that we've got. So I think there's some great opportunities there for us. In Greater Manchester, we're actually convening a social providers federation. So we're bringing together our social providers across the system, and that's going to sit within the new ICS, the Integrated Care System, and it's going to sit within that structure and link to their kind of public sector provider board, and it's going to have parity with that. So that's something that we've been able to do with the work that we've been doing with Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester. I've been lucky enough to sit on the Social Enterprise Advisory Panel within Greater Manchester and work alongside the Inequalities Commission work that's been happening there. So that's been part of that, and a really good outcome of the last 12 months.
Just for our listeners who may not be clued up on all the NHS acronyms, because there are millions of them out there. So when you talk about ICSs, that's an integrated care system. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah. And you've got ICOs, or integrated care organisations, and ICPs are integrated care partnerships.
And they're all different things.
Well, pretty much the same thing, but it's like an interchangeable term that different areas use different acronyms. So sorry about that. Yeah.
So they're the organisations that will be responsible for commissioning services. So kind of the Social Providers Federation, that's bringing together social enterprises, other kind of community groups within the health system to kind of work in partnership and work with the ICS, so the ICS knows basically what the provider landscape is like in Greater Manchester. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's going to be a collaboration of providers that share values, share have work across the whole of GM or work across parts of GM, multiple kind of areas, work across multiple aspects of the care and health system. So it'll be a diverse partnership of organisations, and then as we work alongside colleagues within the NHS and kind of we get work from that. We then can disseminate that down to the smaller grassroots organisations that we work with in our areas. So it's an experimental kind of way of doing things, but I'm really kind of positive about the way that the ICS in Greater Manchester have kind of responded to that, and we've got a real mandate from Andy Burnham and from the Combined Authority in Greater Manchester, which has been really good to see.
Expanding on that, I guess, has kind of devolution to kind of the regions and having the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, has that kind of really helped your work? Like, what are your thoughts on devolution and social enterprises and the health system?
I don't remember voting for it, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure I voted for devolution when it happened 5 years ago. I think it's been quite slow. So I think it's been a slow process. I think it's been. I think in the last 18 months, I think they've really got to grips with it. I think there's been a few things that needed to be lined up, like the changes in health and social care. I think to some extent the pandemic has helped kind of local authorities to work in collaboration a lot more closely because they've had to, because of the nature of what's happened. So yeah, I think it has taken a while. I think the sector, it's taken a while for us to respond to the kind of the changes that are happening. I think that's only happened much more recently. But I think I think people can see that some real opportunities with devolution, some opportunities to do things in a different way. And I think, there's been some really interesting things like the Inequalities Commission report that was launched a few weeks back. The work that Andy's been doing on the Social Enterprise Advisory group and bringing together that and giving it a mandate to actually run with some ideas. I think that's been really positive. So I think it has brought a lot of opportunities. I think there's some risks there as well. I think with the ICS, you could end up with the public sector just talking to the public sector like it was 20 years ago. And it could end up kind of edging out really the social sector from delivery as a result of that. So there's some real risks there. We're also advocating for the novation of all the contracts that are currently being delivered through ICS bodies, that they're novated on 3-year extensions, so that there is some time to actually change, within the system to adapt to the change. So we're advocating for that. We're advocating, for the same commitment to retaining the jobs within the ICS and making sure that the people in the social sector are not disadvantaged through the novation of contracts, so there's not a reduction in the contract value in effect. And also that there's this parity with the social provider board and the public service provider board as well. So the two things are at the same level within the ICS structure.
And do you think that has that been quite a struggle?
I mean, I think it's very new, and I think that the system is still working itself out. So I don't think it's been a struggle because there's been resistance. I think it's a struggle because it's complicated. And I think, I think also there's had to be a mind shift from the sector to say, often we shout at the system that it needs to change around what we were trying to do. I think to some extent we needed to adapt a little bit to the system and fit within it, rather than saying you've got to fit around us. So we've kind of done a lot of kind of understanding how the system's going to work in Greater Manchester and how we can fit into it. We've got a very complex kind of boiler diagram that kind of show. It's like if you're trying to create a boiler, it looks a bit like that. But there is a lot of kind of moving parts in it, and I think we've been still, and I think we're still working that out. It'll take another 3 years to work through all of those things.
Brilliant, thank you. We can't not really talk about the pandemic and how COVID would have affected your work. Could you tell us a little bit about that period of time and some of the innovations that the team at Social Adventures made? Because I just remember reading about some of them and speaking to Kate on your team about it. It's genuinely some really inspiring stuff that I think only a social enterprise could probably come up with. Yes, could you take us through the last year, I guess?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting last year. I mean, so our headquarters, we worked in partnership with Salford Primary Care Together, which is another social enterprise that delivers primary care within Salford, to set up one of the first COVID triage facilities within Greater Manchester. So that was set up kind of assessing people to refer them into the Nightingale Hospital. So that was quite an exciting. So we're all kind of setting that up in hazmat suits, kind of getting that ready
Wow.
for setup. We did used to have a goldfish in the office. I had to come in at midnight to rescue the goldfish.
Save the goldfish.
But it had to be done after the centre was kind of cleaned and the rest of it. So that was quite an interesting kind of escape. We had an escape plan for the goldfish that had been abandoned.
So you snuck into your office in a hazmat suit to save a goldfish.
Save a goldfish, yeah. It's now my daughter's bedroom. Jeremy's called. He lives in my daughter's bedroom now. But yeah, so that's quite exciting. So we set that up as a COVID triage facility, and we had quite a lot of food production going on within the organisation. So we had a cafe, we had a garden centre where we had a kitchen, we had a number of children's day nurseries. So one of the challenges for the kind of NHS frontline staff was feeding them, because they couldn't go out once they were on site. So we were producing about 1,000 meals a week for NHS frontline staff across Salford, and sending those out, and also doing the kind of food parcels for people who were shielding and isolating. We registered with the Fair Share network, and we started to use that mechanism to kind of feed local people, but also feed the NHS frontline staff. And we the kind of 4 children's day nurseries that we had to shut them down, obviously, in the first lockdown with the pandemic. But we managed to keep one open for key workers, so we were actually working kind of 12-hour days, 7 days a week, offering kind of childcare to NHS frontline staff, which was really popular with the local hospital staff and staff working in the COVID triage centre. So we kind of adapted what we were doing. We learned quite a lot from kind of the food poverty kind of aspect of what we were doing during COVID. So we had a cafe. We decided during the kind of, when we came out of the first lockdown, to kind of set that up as a community supermarket. So we kind of refitted it, kind of kitted it out with kind of shelves to put food on, and kind of started to do a food club from there, where people could get £10 of food for £2.50, and that was really popular with local people. And also set it up as a kind of retail facility, so that we could start retailing to local people as well, because we've got quite a lot of affluent people living locally as well. So we use that as a social enterprise model to kind of morph what we did. We took a lot of our stuff, like many people did, online. So we did a lot of online services, and kept them going. We sent out kind of packs, hundreds and hundreds of kind of activity packs for local people who were isolating. We set up a YouTube TV channel where we communicated with local people. So there was lots of really positive stuff. And I guess, one of the things that we talked about before the call is not losing some of that, making sure that we continue to do some of that post-lockdown on Monday. We're not going to just go back to business as usual. I think it'd be remiss to do that. So we're going to try and hardwire some of these things into what we do going forward.
So it's a supermarket. I'm guessing that's going to become a permanent part of the Social Adventures kind of family, I guess, right?
Yeah. So the Food Collective, the supermarket, yeah, and it's gone really well. It's been a great social project, because we've got Kickstarters in there that are being trained up in retail at the moment. So they're through the government's Kickstarter scheme. So I think we've got 8 Kickstarters, young people that are getting back into employment. We got a retail manager from Morrison's who's leading it. There's some really amazing stuff happening down there, so you can get everything from kind of, there's a keto section down there if you're on a keto diet, all the way through to getting kind of, going in there and doing a shop and then paying £2.50 for it if you're on a low income. So there's a real sense, and we tried to take the stigma out of going to a food bank, so making it into kind of a retail environment, so people feel like they're going to the shops rather than going to a food bank where you get
such a good idea. Yeah. How did that idea come about?
I think it was from feedback from sorry, this is actually my mum ringing me. Sorry about that.
One thing more important than a webinar is picking up the phone for your mum.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll bring her back. So yeah, it came from feedback from staff. Staff that were working. We've got a social prescribing project, and staff were saying that some of the families that were coming through were really struggling with. I mean, food banks were really struggling anyway due to the pandemic, but they were struggling with the stigma attached to going to a food bank. Lots of people who'd been working previously really struggled with the concept of accessing a food bank, but going into a retail environment and doing a shop, paying kind of a quarter of what they normally would pay for it, and linking that to volunteering as well. We've got a lot of people who are working in the shop who are volunteers, and they get a further discount if they're a volunteer in the shop. So having the ability to give back, but also not feel like you're going for a handout is really important to people. And it was changing that relationship between them feeling like they were in effect, because they're volunteering for us and they're getting a discount on their shopping, they're doing us a favour rather than us doing them a favour.
Yeah, and it's building that sense of community, isn't it, and
Yes.
solidarity across Salford. You touched on this already. I think Michael Marmot, wasn't it, recently published a report which showed kind of the shocking fall in life expectancy across many parts of the country, and it showed that Greater Manchester had a COVID death rate, I think 25% higher than the English average, which is also reflected across lots of areas, poor areas of deprivation. Do you think the pandemic has kind of held you back a bit in your work tackling health inequalities, given that, the people most likely to have been affected by COVID are those from lower income backgrounds, minority ethnic groups, and people whose jobs just meant that they're more exposed to the virus?
I think it's highlighted that even after, I think in Greater Manchester we've been really good at trying to invest in health inequalities, that we've not been as effective as we'd like to have thought we were. And I think it highlighted the gap there. And I think it's certainly given me a real motivation to kind of double down on the work that we're doing. I think we have become a little bit insular over the last 18 months. I think we've become a little bit inwardly focused as an organisation. I think we need to get back to that kind of being out in communities and having that strong presence in communities. And I think that it's highlighted that there's a real need to kind of engage with some of these communities in a different way, that we haven't been as effective as we could have been. And what I've seen over the last 18 months is some of the real grassroots organisations out there, thinking about, just up the road from where we are now, there's a real strong Jewish community that, we've worked really closely with. We've worked with an organisation called JAM, which is Jewish Action for Mental Health, really works closely with them to kind of get some of the messages out there around vaccinations and around kind of pandemic. I think we need to kind of be a bit more kind of aware of that and aware of the communities that we're working in, and aware of those hidden communities as well, the ones that we often don't see because they are out there working in low-paid jobs. They're not necessarily accessing services, in the same way as maybe some of the people that we normally work with are. So I think we need to be thinking about how we can kind of reach those communities in a different way, and I think that comes through innovation, and it comes through partnership. They're the two key. It comes through three things: innovation, partnership, and investment. Once you've kind of boxed those three things off, that's where you can really make a difference.
Yeah, we're actually shockingly running out of time, which is quite incredible. So this final question, kind of to wrap it all up. So I guess you've really shown, just incredible innovation that's just such a big part of the social enterprise sector, and how over the pandemic you've been able to respond to kind of the needs of communities and just doing stuff that I guess a traditional public sector body just would not be able to do, like setting up a supermarket. I mean, you think about kind of health and care and kind of population health, you would never expect an organisation that was part of the NHS to be setting up a supermarket that's tackling food poverty. I suppose, like, with all this talk about kind of bringing things back in-house within the NHS, and equally all the talk around, the fears around privatisation, do you think we can make the NHS work more like a social enterprise? And is that even possible?
Yes, I think we can. I think that one of the things that my colleagues that work in this sector, so the colleagues that span out 10 years ago, some of the people that have done that, and some of the people working health and social care within social enterprise, I could name half a dozen straight off the top of the bat that are some of the most entrepreneurial people that I know, who are real innovators, who really challenge the status quo and want to kind of make that difference. I think that, I think we've seen some real strong system leadership in the last 18 months. And I think that maybe there are still those mavericks within the public sector that want to do things differently. And I think over the last 18 months, the public sector has been given more freedom and autonomy to do that. And what we've seen is that they've really stepped up to the plate and kind of been able to kind of, meet the challenges that the country was facing. And I think we need to continue to kind of embrace that a little bit going forward. I think if we kind of douse those flames, I think it would be the wrong thing to do. I think we need to kind of almost kind of pour petrol on those flames and keep going forward. I think there's massive parts of the system that operate like social enterprises already. I think, but it is hit and miss. And I think the opportunities with the integration agenda is to kind of find ways in which the good practice in certain areas can be spread across other parts of the system. But yeah, the simple answer is I think the system works best when it is given that kind of autonomy. I think that's one part of the social enterprise kind of journey that we've been on, is giving the system autonomy to adapt and to change and to innovate. And I think if we don't do that going forward, we're going to face some real challenges.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think we'll move on to questions. I think we've got quite a few questions just from the looks of it. If we can figure out how Zoom works 2 years into kind of using it. I think there's lots of questions in the chat, aren't there? Yeah, a question from Ayushi. What are the key financial problems faced by social enterprises? Ayushi's question is actually looking at corporate supply chains, but I suppose we can kind of look at that also kind of, the financial problems faced by social enterprises generally with working within the health space, because, you don't have that security, I guess, that comes through being part of the NHS. Is that not quite right?
I think if you're working within the public sector, you've got quite clear line of sight on your income. It's quite a good position to be in. You usually get your kind of contracts in advance. We used to get one contract from the local authority a year in advance, which was amazing. It was more of a challenge to kind of make sure that we kind of spread the kind of operating costs out over 12 months rather than it was having the money. So working capital in organisations that have spun out of the public sector tends to be good. If you're working in a normal supply chain, though, having that working capital is quite tough. And I think if you're working on kind of producing stuff to sell into the corporate sector, you need to cash flow that a little bit. And I think this again, this is one of the challenges. The other part of the kind of jigsaw has been around access to capital. And I think, social finance, I had a meeting recently with Big Site Capital, kind of laying out some of the challenges with that still. I think in the private sector, you can raise capital through equity share. You can't do that necessarily within a social enterprise governance structure. And that means that often your kind of working capital can be limited, and often social investors don't want to invest in working capital. If you want to buy a building, they're your best friends. If you want to set up a business, a new start business, or you want to expand your business into, selling into new customers that might be, taking 90 days to pay you, there's some real bridging needs there for you to kind of find. So I think that's something again I think we should be feeding back into the system, especially with colleagues in social finance, to look at how we kind of resource some of
that. David's asked a question, kind of expanding on the stuff around politics, saying that he doesn't understand the decline in support politically, because it is quite interesting, like the changing political landscape from 2011, when social enterprises, if not the top of like the political agenda, was pretty high up, at least when it comes to sort of public services. What do you think's been behind? Sort of touched on this already with kind of Brexit and COVID taking up so much political time. But even with those, it's still quite interesting and maybe surprising that something that has been proven to work so effectively, to show how care and health and care can be delivered in a different way, how that's kind of not gone out of favor, but maybe just kind of ignored or not as visible as it should be to decision makers.
Yeah, I think from 2015 to now, we've really seen a shift in political appetite. I think it's been on our side of the equation. What could we do more of, and what do we need to do more of coming out of the pandemic? I think we need a much more consistent voice as a sector about making the case for how social enterprises and the social sector is kind of really integral in terms of the system kind of approach that they're looking to do within health and social care. I think it's also about us kind of identifying the kind of people within government that are still kind of receptive to this. I think we need to really pinpoint those people. I'm not sure who they are anymore, and I think we need to really try and kind of identify that, and maybe even kind of there's been lots of research done, over the last kind of 10 years on kind of the success of the sector. I think maybe we need to distill some of that and really think about how we can feed that back into some of the messaging. And, hopefully we'll be doing more of this stuff in the future, and getting our kind of voices heard at kind of conferences and kind of speaking engagements. And that's really important as well to kind of really kind of reignite fire. I always feel, in government, I was speaking to Andy Burnham about this. I think it's one of the best kept secrets within the public sector, the success of the social enterprise movement. I think they keep it. I don't know why they keep it under such big raps. You'd expect them to sing and dancing about it.
Because, yeah, exactly.
The public are response. They like the idea of social enterprises delivering their services. They can see the advantages there. So, they usually get really high kind of friends and family kind of ratings within the NHS kind of
CQC ratings.
CQC ratings. Organisations that I'm involved with, the CQC and Ofsted outstanding. So it shows that there's a real kind of drive on quality. There's a real drive on kind of engagement with people, and you'd think that the government would be all over that. So maybe we're not singing a loud enough tune, but also maybe they're just not listening at the moment. Maybe they've got their earplugs in.
Maybe take them out, please. Get listening. So is it the same person, same David? Talk about Scotland. Some of this may not go down to when Scotland. Social enterprise NHS will be seen as backdoor privatisation. I suppose this is kind of an argument that a lot of people have used against the involvement of social enterprises in public services. This kind of privatisation by stealth kind of narrative. What is your response to that? Because it's quite, I suppose even I, when I joined SE UK, not knowing much about social enterprises, the thought of a private organisation running the health service was like, really? I mean, that sounds a bit dubious, doesn't it? And obviously I know so much better now, but what do you say to the privatization by stealth, backdoor privatization argument?
I worked in procurement in the NHS for about 2-3 years before I got told off, and then got moved out of procurement because I was breaking too many rules. But when I was in procurement, there was loads of privatisation by the front door. I wouldn't worry about it by the back door. And I think what we've seen in the last 18 months is wide stock kind of privatisation by the front door. So I wouldn't. There is no reason why the system can't do that already. I think why the system wouldn't do that is because they see the social value. I think the Social Value Act that came in to force the public service. I can't remember what it was called now, but it's the Social Value Act anyway. That was put in probably around the same time actually. And the need for procurement now to recognise social value in it. I think social enterprises can tell that narrative in a unique way, and I think the private sector have tried that. They've tried to whitewash themselves or greenwash themselves, with those kind of credentials, but they really struggle with it. They really struggle because it's not hardwired into what they do as an organisation. They have to add it on as a bolt-on. So I think that there are some great opportunities with the kind of procurement kind of changes, but there are some innate risks in there. I think loosening up the procurement legislation could end up being a race to the bottom, in what we've seen in social care, or it could end up being with, lots of contracts being awarded either to the public sector or even to the private sector. So it's really important that we organise ourselves in a way that we can engage with these new opportunities.
Question from Bob on funding. How do you manage to fund the project outside of local authority money? I guess it's social adventures. It'll be good to find out a bit more about your funding model and how you use your businesses like the garden centre and the supermarket and the nurseries, and how that, I suppose, it enables you to create a stream of income that other providers won't be able to do.
Yeah, so we kind of diversified where the income comes from. So about 40% of our income comes in from local authority and NHS contracting. About 60% of it we earn. So it's either selling plants at the garden centre, coffees out at the cafe. It's either kind of selling childcare to people. So about 40% of it comes in from contracting. Around 50% of it comes in from trading income, and about 10% of it actually comes in from grants. And we use the grants for innovation. So the two kind of caveats with the grant money is that it's going to be sustainable within the lifetime of the grant funding. So it has to be able to wash its face, or it's something that's innovative that can be commissioned in the future. We never go for grant money to kind of support core costs. It's only ever there to kind of do. We almost use it like research and development funding. So we just use it to do that. We don't use it to do the kind of day to day. And we've been lucky enough, it's like 9 out of the last 10 years we've made a surplus, and we've been able to reinvest that back in. And we've generated quite a strong reserve, which has allowed us to kind of have enough operating costs if things go terribly wrong, but also then to innovate and invest in new things and new opportunities.
Did you say 50% through trading income?
I think it was about 50%. Yeah, it might have, I mean, that was based on the year before. We just on the year end, so that was for the year before COVID. So it might be slightly less this year.
That's incredible, actually.
Yeah, so we've kind of diversified quite a long way from those initial NHS contracts.
Because this is a question of kind of like the people that you've got fighting your corner and advocating for you. Michelle has sent a message in the Q&A stuff. I'm founder of a CSE community interest company called Surrey Fields. We're looking for a council-owned site to create our own social concept for collaboration. I'm frustrated at getting hold of the relevant people at the council who have visioned for this. Is it literally about who you know to get a foot in the door with the local council? Like, how do you build those relationships if you just can't find the right person to talk to? It's a very tricky question, but...
Which area are you in, Michelle? Is it Surrey? Surrey Fields, right? Okay. Is that where it is in Surrey? I mean, it'd be you could start with your local politician. I mean, that's often a good place to start with the MP that's in that constituency, and often that's been a really good gateway for us to actually get further into the system. Your system leaders, trying to kind of lobby and kind of, which has been really difficult in the last 18 months because obviously they've been at the coalface of the COVID response. But I think as things start to ease up, they would be people that I would be nobbling. I think, unfortunately, there hasn't been the opportunity to network in the same way as we used to do. So there's not been the same face-to-face kind of interaction that you'd normally have. But I think, maybe the local kind of community and voluntary sector kind of VCSE kind of infrastructure organisation, often they have good links into the system. So they would be my starting points if I was kind of looking at doing that myself. Well, that's helpful.
Well, thanks, Scott, and I hope that did help, Michelle. Cool. I think this may be the final question from Miles. Any thoughts about the green paper and what should be in it? By green paper, is that Health and Social Care Bill? No, this is a different green paper.
Procurement, is it the procurement green paper? I think if it's the procurement green paper, I think we need to be looking at social sector organisations being awarded much longer contracts. Health and wellbeing paper, right? Okay. Yeah. So I think. So what was the question again? So in terms of what the
question is, what should be in it? Quite an open question there. But
wow, yeah. That. I think we need to be looking at more. I mean, co-production has got to be in there, but I also think that we've got to be looking at long-term kind of strategies for health inequalities. I think we're very short-term. When I worked in the NHS, most programs that we were delivering were 3-year projects, 3-year programs of work. They often were national programs, thinking things like Change for Life, and which is all really good stuff, but they were national-based programs which were never really tailored to local communities. They were prescribed by the centre, and I think there's a real risk of that happening again, because there's going to be a much more top-down kind of approach to kind of what happens within public health and health and well-being. I think we need a longer-term approach. I think we need a 15-year generational approach to health inequalities in communities. I think we take too much of a short-term vision of how change happens within communities, and I think we need to have the ability to tailor some of these national priorities into local priorities. So we need to be able to kind of take them away and adapt them so they make sense locally to people. And I think the third thing is, if it's not working, we need to stop doing it, because the amount of times when we've delivered programs health inequalities programs, and they've obviously not worked, and they're obviously not working. But because we've got this 3-year kind of window, we just continue to bat on with it. You know, and you've got a year of setting something up, a year of delivering it, and a year of shutting something down. It's just a far too short-term view on things.
Brilliant. I think that is it for questions. So yeah, all I can say is thank you so much for that, Scott. It was really interesting, enlightening, and yeah, inspiring. Just really captured the difference that social enterprises are making within the public sector. There will be a recording of this webinar available to everybody who maybe wants to re-listen to it, maybe, or for anybody who couldn't join the webinar, you know.
I'll send it to my mum.
You can send it to your mum, and then yeah.
A phone call while I was presenting on a Zoom call.
Moments of fame in a Social Enterprise UK webinar.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.